Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming. It's wonderful to speak about this exhibition, which has given me a lot of joy, and also I was actually quite overwhelmed by the interest in it because as the title, More Than Pretty Flowers, Global Connections and Hidden Treasures in the Art of Rachel Ruysch indicates, sometimes you have to make a little bit of a case for flower painting. And as my mother always says, they sometimes start to look very similar, so do something about it. So this was one of the interesting challenges we had for this exhibition, and it's all the more delightful to see that we've had very good attendance to the show. So let me start with my lecture today. Rachel Ruysch was among the most renowned and successful still life painters in the late 17th and early 18th century Europe. Her work was collected by European royalty, and she received the high honor of serving as a court painter to the German ruler Johann Wilhelm in Düsseldorf. She had a productive 7-decade-long career, which is a really long time considering that the average life expectancy was about 58. And a year before her death in 1750, when she was 86, 11 writers wrote poems in her honor, praising her as the Flora of Amsterdam. Now, despite the fame during her lifetime, Ruysch remained largely overlooked, although not entirely forgotten, until recently. The last catalog on her work appeared 70 years ago, and there are no articles on her work. So, we are very proud to present the first ever solo exhibition dedicated to Rachel Ruysch, organized in partnership with the Alte Pinakothek in Munich, which you see here on your left, with the pink flags, and the Toledo Museum of Art at the center. Now, instead of presenting her art as part of an all-female survey, we gave her the traditional monographic treatment typically reserved for male artists like Frans Hals and Vermeer. In what follows, I will discuss key works from across Ruysch's career, really do some close looking with lots of details, and situate these works in the wider context of other still life painters and botanical illustrators. The three artists that I'll be focusing on are Maria Sibylla Merian, Willem van Aalst, and Abraham Mignon, as well as highlighting the wider context of scientific developments in the area of botany and entomology. And as we will see, Ruysch was very much a product of her time, and she was connected to a wide network of artists and scientists. Flipped, okay. Now, although Ruysch was part of a still life tradition dating back to the early 1600s, she was able to develop a distinctive approach. Key among her innovations was that she expanded the range of flowers she depicted and perfected the technical brilliance and precision of her works. So this painting alone has over 30 only flower species. Haven't even counted the insects. But the biodiversity is tremendous. As we will see, she had a keen eye not only for local flowers, but also for unusual flowers from across the globe, which arrived in the Netherlands through colonial expansion. She was interested in their smells, their growing patterns, and their behaviors. And more than her contemporaries, she added a host of crawling and fluttering insects to her creations, which infused her work not just with a sense of liveliness, but also with a sense of danger and darkness. In so doing, she merged a scientific approach with a manner of storytelling that highlighted the wonders of nature and the darker forces hidden within. So before I delve into the beauty and the dangers, I would like to take a step back and tell you a little bit about the process of the exhibition, which is what is what we do on a day-to-day basis, and I thought I'd give you a little view of that. So I'm pleased to acknowledge my co-curators, Robert Schindler, curator at Toledo, who initiated this project, and Bernd Ebert, formerly curator in Munich, now director in Dresden, who joined the project for collaboration between our three institutions. I would also like to thank Pierre Turjanian, and Graham Gunn director, Frederick Ilchman, chair of Art of Europe, Chris Atkins, director of the Center for Netherlands Art, and Angie Marrow, senior director of exhibitions, for their unwavering support for this project. This was a project that was 3 years in the making, and their support meant so much. And I'd like to thank so many other people, too many people to mention here, across the museum who brought the exhibition to fruition. Now, a workshop organized by the CNA here at the MFA offered us a crucial opportunity to discuss her work with specialists, including Director of Conservation Rona Macbeth and Chris Atkins from our team here in the center. And we were lucky to have a number of our own paintings. This is the, anyway, I'll point. Also in the exhibition, and we had an opportunity to start looking at things up close. Now, to mount an exhibition like this, we traveled to examine her works in person. And as you can see here in the Castle Fasanerie in Eigenzell, in Germany, we had to climb up a ladder to actually be able to see the painting. They had turned off the heating because it was winter and the palace was closed, so we kept our coats on because it was really quite cold. A very nice surprise of the day was that they had a beer garden near the castle, and I had the wonderful, German food there. So this was actually one of my favorite stops, even though it was very cold, to see this beautiful palace, which has an amazing porcelain collection, some Rubenses, hanging around, and then a really great Ruysch collection as well. So the show brings together 35 of Ruysch's paintings, in addition to collaborators, and we want to thank the 40 generous lenders from Europe and the US for making the exhibition possible. Beyond research, we have a content team here at the museum who spent over a year preparing the design, the interpretation, and the videos for the exhibition. And you've shown here on your screen on the left is the content team with Jordan Cromwell, Nick Pioja, the graphic designer, Sana Rao, who did the design, and Kat Bossi, the project manager. So if you've seen the exhibition, we organized the space into 6 sections that follow a roughly chronological order, but also complemented by thematic highlights. And each room feels a little different. So we get asked about colors a lot, and that's, of course, a very important part of the viewer experience. So we typically come up with some colors, and then we make bigger mock-ups and reproductions to sort of see what colors work. So another big part of this exhibition was working with biologists to highlight the stories that flowers tell. Now, both the story of Ruysch as a woman scientist and her knowledge of flowers had a personal resonance for me, because my mother, now in her 80s, was one of the few women of her generation to obtain a PhD in biology in the Netherlands. You see her here surrounded by boxes of dried flowers in the Leiden Herbarium. She was one of only 3 women in the entire Netherlands to obtain a PhD in 1972. Now, she made me take a lot of science courses in high school, so I felt immediately drawn to this project. Closer to home, I collaborated with Professor Charles Davis from Harvard University. He's a professor of biology, and there's another personal connection as well because our sons are very good childhood friends. Now, Professor Davis joined our team from the beginning and helped us with the identification of the specimens and the scientific context for the show. And you see him here on your screen in the Harvard Herbarium, and there's about 5 samples of dried flowers in the show. Apart from interdisciplinary research, we also did basic archival research, examining documents about Ruysch's life, such as the document of her betrothal, which shows that she married another artist by the name of Julian Pol at the age of 28. Her father, Professor Frederick Ruysch, was her witness. So you can see so at this point she's 28, 29. Now the father is of course a very important influence on her. She grew up in an intellectual household. Her father was a famous anatomist and botanist in Amsterdam who turned their house into a natural history museum. Her father, it's a sort of a weird collection, right? Because it consisted of anatomical oddities and thousands of insects and amphibians. He turned some of these elements into macabre tableaus, complete with a landscape made of kidney stones and infant skeletons weeping into their handkerchiefs. And this is the darker aesthetic that left a lasting mark on Rachel. I should say that on the mother's side, she was related to the Post family. Maria Post was her mother, and Frans Post, of course, is also a painter. So she really grew up in a very accomplished environment. Now, the first section, so let's go to the exhibition. The first section evokes her father's curiosity cabinet. Here we didn't put in the skeletons, but really the specimens that we thought influenced her. We juxtaposed outstanding works from across her career with specimens from Harvard's natural history collections, including 300 butterflies, moths, and beetles, total of 20 species, and 5 lizards and snakes, which all appear in her paintings. Now, so this, on the one hand, sets up the stage for her, environment, but it's also really important because Ruysch's paintings showcase such a remarkable diversity of insects. So, according to Katrina Smit-Loske, head of the Biohistoricum in Bonn, who contributed to the catalog, Ruysch painted up to 40 species of butterflies and moths, which is far more than that of her contemporaries, who rarely picked up more than 10. Amazing. So to drive that point home, here are some of the details taken from her paintings across her career, starting at 1682, which is her earliest, and then 1735, when she's in her 70s. So early on, look at the top row, she painted mostly European species. You might recognize the admiral butterfly, which you see in the first and the third block. Later on, she incorporated rare non-native ones, most striking the blue morpho butterfly up in the fourth and the top row. This was a butterfly that was imported from Brazil, and imagine seeing that for the first time, because people, of course, hadn't seen the morpho butterfly before. So the morpho is common, at this point in botanical illustration, but she was the first to put it in a painting. Collectors in the 17th century admired butterflies for their vibrant colors and the intricate patterns, And they were fascinated by the fact that most colors in butterflies were iridescent colors produced by the refraction of light on the wings, as Karen Leonard has shown. So these are not stable colors. But there's one really unusual butterfly, the Nisea abrinus, this one. Now, knowing that she was so interested in these butterflies, we thought, why not bring together a group of real butterflies to not only point people to the equivalents in the paintings, but also to create some of that beauty that people were attracted to. So in the first room of the exhibition, we wanted to create this idea of the curiosity cabinet. But then there's, of course, the question, it's like going to Whole Foods or something, the bigger ones. Like, I just need a piece of cheese, and there's like so much to choose from. So we started with a few boxes, and then we thought, okay, let's just go all out. Let's do a lot of boxes. So then we asked the curator at Harvard, and she said, can we have 6 boxes? So finally said, okay, 9 boxes, but no more. And then, you know, I went to my object conservator and my decorative art colleagues, and they said, yeah, Antien, that's a lot of boxes. You're lucky. So with that in mind, let me show you how the process went, because we actually custom-made the boxes for this show. We didn't just go to Natural History Museum and open the drawer. So we started with the research that was performed by Katrina Schmidt-Loske in Bonn. So she wrote for the catalog, and she made all these PowerPoints of the paintings and identified the lizards and the insects. She does it in German and in, you know, the English translation. So then, with that in mind, we had to check with Crystal Meyer, the curator at Harvard, whether those butterflies were in their collection. In most cases, we are lucky here, they have a lot of this species, but in other cases, they said, oh, we only have 12, right? So in that case, we couldn't, you know, we only could get maybe half of that. Sorry. So then Crystal Meyer said, well, we need a spreadsheet of all the, you know, butterflies that Christina had calculated. So this is only the top. This is, you know, went on and on and on and on. And then you can get you an image of the specimen. Now, of course, I'm not, you know, I took science courses, but I didn't know that much about butterflies. So it was a steep learning curve. So sometimes I would do these searches. So this is the cabbage white. You know, you get 96 hits. So finally, we sort of narrowed it down, and I made 9 boxes, and I decided to do 2 per box. And then I sort of mocked it up, and then I asked Crystal if she could work with that, and she did. And in this case, you see she pins each butterfly and then barcodes it. In certain cases, they weren't cataloged. So, and the boxes were ordered, special ordered by us, so that the butterflies really got a beautiful environment. You know, it really makes a difference if it's like a styrofoam, or in this case, it's a beautiful deck of a sort of beige color. Jean is in the audience. She helped me also with the scaling, because of course you don't, it says like 3 centimeters, you don't really know how big they are, how many fit in a box. So in the end, I think we got it right, because they're not too close together. And they look, if you go back to this slide here, we put them on the wall. Complement the paintings, but you can still see the specimens in and of itself. It's not too close together. Yes. So that is as far as the behind the scenes and the butterfly boxes are concerned. And I should thank Abby, the head of object conservation, for helping us finding the right boxes for them. So I would like to now take a deeper dive into Ruysch's work and highlight how she set herself apart from her contemporaries. I will show examples of subgenres that she is best known for, the flower bouquet and the fruit still life, and place them in the wider context. Ruysch also painted other types of genres, the forest floor, the nosegay, the festoon, the hanging fruit, highlighting that she painted works for different segments of the market. She, after all, was painting not for private individual only until 1708, but in the first decades of her career, she had to compete with a whole host of other still life specialists. Now, coming from a well-to-do family, Ruysch had the opportunity to train with the best flower painter in Amsterdam, Willem van Aalst. Ruysch entered his studio in the late 1670s and worked with him until his death in 1683. And she's only, 16 at that point. Now, the painting on your screen, which is on view in the exhibition, is a typical example of Van Aalst. It's an asymmetrically arranged bouquet in a delicate vase, which sits on a marble ledge set against a dark background. Flowers are shown from different angles, and the roses, which he loved, are shown in different stages, in full bloom and in the tightly closed bud. He achieved a great harmony of colors by contrasting the pastel pinks and whites of the roses and hollyhocks against the green of the foliage and the bright accents of the orange marigold and blue ribbon attached to the pocket watch on the ledge. Pleasing for the eye, the arrangement does include traditional symbols of death and the passing of time. You also see, in addition to the pocket watch, there's the mouse on the left. Now, take a look at Ruysch. So these paintings are hanging together in the first room. This is only dated 1686, so that's a couple years after she studied with Van Aalst. So you can see a lot of similarities, right? The marble ledge, the elegant glass vase, the pale pink and white blossoms at the heart of the composition, and a relatively large amount of space around the bouquet. Later on, she sort of starts to fill that up. Now, the purple cloth was also a Van Aalst motif, and like the blue ribbon, it spills over into the pictorial space of the viewer. You know, it sort of brings you closer. But already in this early still life, painted shortly after leaving Van Aalst's studio, she shows a different approach. Instead of including the traditional vanitas symbols, she expanded the range of species and added a sense of drama to the composition. She introduced bolder colors. Notice the red and white feathered poppy that appears at the top in the form of a closed bud and an opened flower in the bottom. And the frayed edges silhouetted against the dark background like a piece of against the background. The same flower appears face down at the bottom. So I'm talking about apart from adding more variety, she also, such as the blue morning glory at the center, she also added a striped grass, which creates movement and airiness in the composition. Prominently placed on the ledge is no longer a pocket watch, but the emperor moth. Higher up, above the poppy, is an admiral clutching on the striped grass. Ants crawl over the white flower in the center. So with these changes, Ruysch distinguished herself from her teacher and would likely tap into new audiences. So where could she have seen these insects? So here you see a detail of the emperor moth, the small emperor moth, I should say, which is opened, and then the admiral butterfly on the left. At this time, there was a huge interest in crawly creatures. As we've seen, Frederick Ruysch was an avid collector of them. The emperor moth in the foreground is not seen in nature because it was painted from a pinned variety because of the position of the wings. And so likely she would have seen this either in a collection or in a book. The Dutch entomologist Johannes Goedaert had paved the way for detailing the metamorphosis of insects, but it was another female artist, Maria Sibylla Merian, who revolutionized the field of natural history by publishing books on caterpillars that showed not just the metamorphosis, but also the relationship between the insects in their host plants in bold compositions that gave the plants and animals real volume. So, for example, in 1679, she published her so-called caterpillar book, written in her native German. Of the same year is this watercolor that is based on plate 13 of the book, with the same small emperor moth that Ruysch depicted in the Bremen picture, here shown as about to land on the leaf of a small damson plum. So I believe it's likely that with the increased interest in insects through publications like Merian and Goedaert, Ruysch was encouraged to incorporate these findings in her own paintings. Now, it's a little bit hard to read, but it's also in the catalog, and this is a map of Amsterdam. So I think it's likely that Ruysch met many of the peoples and collectors in Amsterdam that gave her inspiration. So you can see here that, for instance, Rachel lived in that same part of Amsterdam. Marion was, of course, German, but she moved there in 1691, and they were about 15 minutes apart. Also, you may have heard of the German traveler and collector Zacharias van Uffenbach, who visited Amsterdam in 1711, and on that occasion, he visited both Ruysch and Maria Sibylla Merian in the same span of a month. Evidence that they were connected at least through Uffenbach. And we think there was this network of people who visited each other's collections, exchanged ideas, and also visual information. Interestingly, Maria Sibylla Merian also mentioned Ruysch's father, Frederick Ruysch, in the preface of her monumental book on the metamorphosis of Suriname, which she published in 1705. So at the very least, we know that Merian knew Ruysch's father. Now, in the 1690s, Ruysch further developed her style. Her paintings became larger and more ambitious, incorporating an ever wider variety of flowers, including rare and unfamiliar flora and fauna, and highlighting the tension between beauty and violence. And I'm grateful to Don Skorzewski for discussing this theme in Ruysch's work with me. So let's look at these two paintings. We've done a comparison of Van Aalst and Ruysch. Can you guess which one is by Van Aalst and which one is by Ruysch? Okay, I got one for the left. Yes, very good. Yeah, so the one on the left is by Van Aalst, and the one on the right is by Ruysch. And how did you recognize it? Exactly. So in a way, it works very well. These artists sort of had a pictorial style. They needed to be recognized by a collector. And one of the trademarks that Van Aalst had, in addition to beautiful flowers, was the pocket watch with the blue. And not once did Ruysch use a blue ribbon or a pocket watch, because that was clearly somebody else's. Oh, thank you. Okay, gotcha. So thank you, Nate. So this is the pocket watch, and then here is are the roses. Ruysch also, meanwhile, she started off, remember, with the marble ledge. Now she has this sort of stone ledge that she uses only for a decade, but I think she's clearly wanting to forge her own way. She still has the blue iris, still the dark background, also the splayed striped tulip is also in the center. And then this insect is the same as here. But one of the things also that you'll notice is that the leaves in Van Aalst are bluish. And this is simply because he used ultramarine and covered it with a varnish in Eijk yellow, which then evaporated over time. So it's called the blue leaf phenomenon. So some of his leaves are not as green, and clearly Ruysch had a different technique. Now let's look at some of the details to show the differences more. So she still has the tulip in the center, and incidentally, this is on our catalog, and we had a discussion about whether this should be on the front or this should be on the front. And our wonderful editors here at the MFA said, oh, it should be the tulip. And I happened to be in the Netherlands, so I just went by my favorite flower shop, and I went to 3, and they all agreed with her that it should be the tulip. And the reason is that this is a bit too crowded for the front. But be that as it may, the tulip here, what I find interesting is that happening. And so she has within the beautiful details sometimes these surprises. Also compare if you look at the tulip, Ruysch's tulip is really drooping and it has faded. And we all know what happens when tulips sort of after a week start to droop in a vase. And Van Aalst still, he opens up the tulip to sort of show that it's, sort of at the end of its cycle, but there's still a sort of gloss and waxiness on the tulip, whereas Ruysch has observed it a little better, and it's really a sort of dead tulip at the end of its cycle. Also, have you noticed this interesting praying mantis that she adds? You don't really see it at first, but if you look closer, you start observing these insects. And I think she's very sort of deliberate in terms of sort of the tension between beauty and decay and sort of danger that you might not first observe. So these are sort of hints of decay and danger, and resting on the leaf, so like Van Aalst, Ruysch included the popular red admiral that you see here, but she added again a host of other insects. Here's a spider, here is a bumblebee, the dragonfly, and this is the cabbage white, which you saw Crystal put in the box. So hidden at the center are all these insects that evoked amazement in contemporary viewers for the beauty of small things. And Karen Leonard has shown that this admiration for the microcosm of nature goes back as far as Pliny, who notes in his Natural History, nature is to be found in her entirety, nowhere more than in the smallest creatures. So Ruysch really took that to heart, and the paintings really invite that close looking and discovery of the friendly insects and then also the more darker looking ones. Now, Ruysch's approach to nature is also evident in this portrait that was painted 4 years before completing this painting. It shows Ruysch when she was 28 years old, seated in her studio. The work is a collaboration. Portrait painter Michiel van Musser painted her, surrounded by paraphernalia of her craft. Ruysch herself added the flowers on the table, an advertisement for her abundant flower bouquets that are rich with movement and life. And you see here, so this is what she painted, and you can see there's the tulip, the snowballs. This is still, a mixture of Van Aal's and her own invention. And then this is a nosegay with, again, the admiral butterfly. The open book on the ledge includes a drawing that Kathleen Powell Warren has identified as a work of the Morning Glory by Herman Henstenberg, who was an important botanical artist. You see this is the drawing, and then here is the equivalent in Braunschweig. And the inscription here on the left, which would normally identify the flower, here identifies the two painters. So this depiction highlights that Ruysch, who was only 28, already had a name in Amsterdam, but it also shows her process of working as she draws inspiration from other people. Here's the drawing, but also from nature itself. She's handling here a peony, and then here's a shell with the yellow pigment. So, in addition to having access to the latest scientific developments in the study of insects, including Maria Sibylla Merian, Ruysch equally benefited from the influx of large numbers of non-native flowers that entered Dutch botanical gardens in the late 17th century as the result of colonial expansion. The Netherlands experienced a green revolution with horticulturists competing to cultivate in greenhouse tropical species from pineapples and eggplants to cacti and passion flowers. And Ruysch was at the center of it all, incorporating these botanical novelties in her art. So just take a look here. This still exists if you go to Amsterdam. And this is the entrance gate. And then this is the greenhouse. And these are all the flower beds where the gardeners and the overseers planted the flowers. And it must have been something really amazing because, of course, they could tap into the networks of trade. And the person in charge of the garden, Jan Huidekoper, was also a member of the Dutch East India Company. So this was really a really exciting place to be with new species that Europeans had not seen before. The garden had moved in 1682 to a much larger space, and it soon developed into one of the richest collections of native and exotic plants in all of Europe. Rachel's father, Frederick Ruysch, was appointed professor of native plants in 1685, and in this capacity taught there twice a week. Now, he's often named director of the garden, but that position didn't really exist, and it was really two other people, Jan Kommelen, an apothecary, and Jan Huidekoper, who were in charge of the day-to-day managing and acquiring of the species. So there's sort of this tendency to always link Ruysch to the father and say, oh, well, of course the father was the director, so he helped her. But in very fact, he was just a visiting professor, and it was a whole group of other people who developed the garden. Now, the VOC managed trade with the East Indies, and as a result, Amsterdam became a center for the growing of non-native plants that were transported on ships in the forms of seeds, bulbs, shrubs, and living plants. And a colleague in Amsterdam was telling me that they still have the boxes that they used on those VOC ships. They still exist. Because, of course, on a ship, anything can happen, and they complained about rats that were eating the plants. So you really needed to be very careful how you transported them. And so you can imagine after that whole long 6-month journey, finally, bringing them to to Amsterdam and then managing them in a hothouse or a greenhouse. In the Dutch cold climate, it had to be very warm, and they invented this system with heated floors so that they could survive in the Netherlands. And you can read these inscriptions on drawings where you say, oh, we were able to grow for the first time the pineapple. And now sometimes they said, oh, it started to rot. But this was really a sort of a new moment, what I would call a green revolution in horticulture that Ruysch benefited from. Now, how did she respond to all of this? All these new species, and it's really in the thousands. Like, they started out with maybe 1,000 different species, and then in around 1700 they had 8,000. You could find them not just in Amsterdam, but also in all the private gardens like Agnes Blok, and the Vecht is still a very nice place to go, but there were all these private gardens, and Agnes Blok was one of them, and she grew on her estate flowers, and she had birds, and commissioned people to document them. So what was Ruysch's reaction to this? So this is 1696, this is still a little bit von Ausleik. But now the tulip is gone, the iris is gone. Everything that we're familiar with from already 60 years is out of her picture. And every single, except for the lily maybe, plant here is non-native and must have been growing in these hothouses. So look at this. This is a devil's trumpet from Mexico, a carrion flower from South Africa, a passion flower from Brazil, the oleander from Sri Lanka. This is from North America, a red trumpet flower. And then, of course, very much in the foreground is the morpho butterfly. Now, that was, as I said, imported also from Brazil. So this is not just a flower painting, it's really a map of the world where she's brought together the most extraordinary botanical oddities that had only just arrived. And I should add that the devil's trumpet is a toxic flower, and the carrion flower, which she depicts here, has a very strong smell, and in real life, it actually attracts flies. Here she shows it with a butterfly. But so she's really, I think, tapping into this interest in new species. She was aided not just by the actual flowers that she could have studied in Amsterdam, but also by the many botanical drawings. And we have a number in the exhibition. This is the daughter of Maria Sibylle Marion, Johanna Herold. It's attributed to, but it's the exact same flower except in white and purple, again also with a morpho butterfly at the top. And so we can see this interesting cross-fertilization between botanical illustrators and Ruysch, who was the first to introduce these plants in the still life genre. Now, the Amsterdam Hortus Botanicus commissioners patronized, oh no, that's not the word, commissioned artists to document their flowers in these watercolors. And we have the Monings Atlas in the exhibition that shows the carrion flowers. And these, were sort of happening side by side. So again, here's the morpho butterfly. I love it that she contrasted with the swallowtail, which is European. So she's sort of trying to make sense of this new flora and fauna, and of course she uses a Western vase, and again she has the ledge, and the whole idea of a bouquet is of course a very Western tradition, but she's so interested in it, and I think this could have been a commission for a gardener who wanted to see these new arrivals. I should also say that she sort of uses that leaf as a compositional device, beautiful nerves here. So in the exhibition, we have the morpho butterfly, and you can see this is what she must have seen, right, in her father's collection, or Levinus Vincent, or many of the other collectors. And then the same combination of flowers, this is sort of the focal point of an exhibition room called, Flowers of Empire, where she goes even further. So this is about 40 years later. She sort of returns to this, her very first foray into foreign flowers. And here she adds even more, right? So you see again the carrion flower, which is with the swallowtail, and the oleander. She loves the devil's trumpet. But here the cactus, look at that. That's really beautiful, and it sort of almost comes crawling out of the vase. She fills the picture plane much more, and she adds a statue of the garden here. So this is her sort of looking back on her career. I'm just showing it to you for the point of the introduction of foreign species. So in the show, we have this diagram with the map, which was developed by Charles Davis, who was mesmerized by these works. He loves any flower, but especially these botanical oddities because they're so interesting. And so he went to work, and he would do this at the coffee break with his colleagues at Harvard, and they would identify the flowers and then find their geographic origin. So for instance, the carrion flowers here. So of course, there was a botanical garden set up by the Dutch in South Africa, of course, the Indian Ocean, and then also the Americas. So this one painting contains 36 species covering 5 continents. So this is a really sort of great visualization to see the extent to which Amsterdam had become sort of the center of the world in terms of exchange of botanical species that then Ruysch responded to with these remarkable paintings. So I encourage you to spend some time with that. We have drawings, and we have also the real specimens so that you can see the cactus with a sample, a dried sample from the herbarium. So, let's see, my transition. So what we actually write in the label is not just to sort of think about where these species come from, but also to sort of think of the deeper meaning. Because among this sumptuous bouquet, viewers will find a toxic devil's trumpet, a pungent carrion flower, and a prickly cactus. So what was she trying to do with this? Like, this is not the most happy, the mood is a little dark, right? So we asked the question, was Ruysch marveling at the wonders of a rapidly changing world, celebrating Dutch global reach, or hinting at the vanity of colonial ambition? And so we leave it up to you. Now, we've looked at a lot of flowers. In closing, I want to also look at some fruit still lifes. So she had, of course, her specialties, but later, around 1700, she starts to add fruit to her repertoire. And she created these abundant and colorful displays of realistically rendered autumnal fruits, but hidden among the beauty, again, are these hints of, insects and darker stories. Now, most of these stem from around 1700, when Ruysch's career was flourishing. She was the first woman to be accepted to the Confrérie Pictura, a painters' association in The Hague, in 1701. And then in 1708, she received the honor of serving as court painter to Johann Willem, the Elector Palatine in Düsseldorf. Now, room 5 in the exhibition, which is red, brings together a group of these impressive and monumental works made for her patron. Now, you see here in this letter, which was discovered by Susan Tipton, and which was actually in the Munich exhibition, because it's in Munich, where in the archive there, And it says here, there's just a quote, Your Highness had the goodness and patience to witness what diligence my sweet daughter displays in making a flower piece, and all of that done after life without copying from others, which she will present to you, Your Highness. And this was the letter that her father sent to Johann Willem. This was her trial piece, and ultimately she got the job. But the letter is interesting because A, it shows that her father helped her in introducing her to Johann Willem. But also I love that he says, done after life. So that phrase is very common in Dutch art theory, but it also sort of highlights why she was able to emulate other still life paintings, because she was so good at observing the behavior of plants and also new plants that had not been seen before. So let's take a look at a fruit still life. Another question, so we're now in the 1700s, so at this point she's in her 40s. One is done by Abraham Mignon, was a contemporary of Van Aalst. The other one was done by her. Any idea which one was done by Ruysch and which one was? Okay. Mm-hmm. Any other votes? Okay, I got one vote for the left. We need a breaking vote. Left, yeah. It is actually on the left, but they are very close. So I would say that her lighting is very dramatic, but it's a little softer. I think this is a little harsher, and I'll go through some of the details. It's also not really a fair question because we haven't done Mignon yet, but it was just to, get you, make sure you're engaged. So here is Mignon. He's not in the exhibition. He's not an artist. He sort of falls between the cracks a little bit, but I wanted to emphasize or introduce him here to sort of look at some of the details and how she's trying to emulate an existing artist like Mignon, who I should briefly introduce. So he was of the generation of Van Aalst, and Mignon was born actually in Frankfurt, trained with the flower painter Jacob Marel, before moving to Utrecht, where he became a close associate of the flower painter Jan Davidson de Heem, who's also in our collection in the 1670s. Mignon became highly successful with a brand of lush fruits set against a made-up forest setting and a dark background. Mignon died in 1678, and Ruysch continued to draw on his work throughout her career, because you can see this is in 1717. So let's look at the two examples. Now, both artists, are very talented and excelled at rendering realistic textures and contrasting surfaces. However, I would argue that Ruysch's works appear more natural and less artificial than those by Mignon. So the detail of the grapes, for example, you see these beautiful full grapes by Ruysch that are a bit softer in light, and you can really see the waxy surface of the grape. The light I find is a little bit more nuanced, and she captures that dull sheen of the grapes. The texture is really exaggerated here, right, by Mignon, to the point that they don't really look that attractive anymore. Here you really get that velvety surface from the peaches, again a little bit softer. The colors are also not as unrealistic. And then the bark of the tree, that's really typical of Mignon. He always has these sort of patches of color, and she creates a more sort of um, she captures the tree with the moss growing over it with much softer brush strokes. The detail here, this is that soft moss, and you see the holes in the tree. So altogether a little bit softer and more realistic. Now she also adds life and dynamism to the piece by adding all these insects. So we have insects in Mignon. There's a beetle, and this is called a cockchafer, which is very common in works around the 1670s. But look what Ruysch does. She introduces the stag beetle, the green brush cricket, and then this is one of her favorite insects, the longhorn beetle. So those really capture the eye, right? They're right in the foreground, and they're large, and of course there's a shadow underneath here, and then the reflection. Again, we have the same beetles in the show. She also, the stag beetle is European, and Dürer had done it, and Hoefnagel and Jacob Marel. So this was, you know, this animal had a legacy, so to speak. So she say, hey, I can do that. But wait a minute, I can also do a beetle you've never heard of, which is the Thomson longhorn beetle, which came from the Congo. So I think she's really showing off here and saying, in my pieces, you find a bigger diversity. And this is actually in the box, and I didn't realize it was so small when I looked it up in the database, but I think it works because it gives you a sense of the skill and the minutiae of her works. This is sort of hidden amongst the leaves. So just to show, the stag beetle is here, was already done by Dürer, as I said, and by Jacob Marel, but she doesn't just depict it, she, sort of lets it crouch toward the eggs, and here is a caterpillar, so there's that sort of tension that I talked about before. Now, how has she done in emulating Mignon? Let's look at Houbraken. He writes in the life of Abraham Mignon, his artworks with all types of flowers and fruits depicted after life were highly esteemed by art lovers during his lifetime. They would have risen in price even more after his death, were it not for the sweet painting brush of Mrs. Ruysch and Jan van Huysum, who were able to imitate nature more closely, and as a result were able to depict such objects with greater luster. So this is the highest praise, right? Houbraken was an important art theorist who wrote biographies of artists, and he's basically saying that Mignon was very good, but at the end of the day, it was Ruysch who imitated nature more closely. So I think she's, you can sort of see that in the details. And here, just to show again that she also added the blue the rainbow whiptail, which, like the flowers, was an innovation. It came from Venezuela. This is Mignon, who also had lizards, but it's the bridled skink. And that blue lizard, there's a reason why we use it on our website, and it's one of our key images. It's, of course, really eye-catching. And we have even in the show a real one, again, from the Museum of Comparative Zoology. And they keep it in these bottles, and then they brought it over to our lab and put it in a cleaner bottle. Here's also the toad that's in the show, and then here we're installing it with the Curator. And then this is how it actually looked eventually in the display, really mimicking a little bit the actual 17th century collectors, such as those by Levinus Vincent, who I've mentioned before. He had an enormous collection with 400 bottles filled with these lizards and boxes filled with butterflies, and here are the beetles. So she could have very well and most likely have visited this and drawn inspiration from it. There were also Albert Silba, made a book of his collection, and it has the blue lizard. And then even Maria Sibylla Marion, who had gone to Suriname and who published the Metamorphosis Insectorum Surinamensium, really important natural history publication in 1705. This is done in 1717. And look how closely the lizard matches that of Marion. Also, like Marion, there's cut open fruits. This is a date with the flesh sort of opening up, and the interaction with the fly, the lizard. That's very Marion, right? It's not as static as Seba, who's just cataloging. They're really thinking of the species in their ecological context. And then finally, an overview of all the lizards. She really makes it one of her trademarks. This is early in 1683, and then here we go, 1711, 1714, 1717 is the one we just saw. This is another guy who's eating the pomegranate. So you can see that this is another way of her to enliven the genre, and it's very much commented on by the poets that wrote poems in her honor. And this one says, "But oh, what disaster is afoot? Did violence leave its imprint? Is innocence not safe from pillaging? The lizard destroys the nest. Let's take revenge, O Paul. How do I punish evil?" So this is Nicholas Winter, who contributed to this group of poems that were written in her honor a year before her death. And the lizard really was one of the favorite of these poets. So you can see that it resonated with contemporary viewers, and I think it still does so today. So with that, let me conclude the end. So with this exhibition, we have sought to give Ruysch the scholarly attention she deserves, and to celebrate the contributions of women to the history of art and science. We've tried to show Ruysch's role in a broader network of collectors and artists beyond her father. And more than simply cataloging her work, our goal has been to show and to highlight her pioneering role in redefining the genre of still life painting, creating astonishingly beautiful depictions of nature and responding to the rapidly changing and expanding world of global botany and entomology. And before I open it for questions, I'd like to alert you to an exciting Ruysch event on October 30th. In the evening, there will be a concert by Handel and Haydn Society in response to the Ruysch exhibition, and 3 lectures by Charles Davis, who you saw on the screen earlier, Claudia Swan, from art historian from George Washington University, and myself with questions afterwards, and we very much hope you'll join us on the 30th. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Hi, so we just asked that you wait for a microphone for our online audience. I'm running one down now.
Did Ruysch and Marion ever meet or collaborate with each other?
Yeah, great question. They lived not too far from each other in Amsterdam, and we don't know if they ever met. They certainly didn't collaborate in the same way that that Marion collaborated, for instance, with Agnes Bloch, where we have a drawing with writing of Bloch, and then she said, Marion added the butterfly, so we know they work together. But interestingly, the publication that's in the exhibition on Suriname insects has a preface, was published in 1705, and Marion says, I visited the collection of Levinus Vincent and Frederick Ruysch. So that tells you that she knew the father, so how could they have not met, right? But there's no direct evidence, and I've tried to show some of the visual connections between the two, and the question is, were they supportive of each other, or, and I've talked to George Abrams about this, who's a collector and who's very interested in Marion, or was there competition? Right? That could have also have been the case. And there is a letter that Frederick Ruysch writes to Johann Willem when Ruysch receives her appointment, and it says, this will silence the enemies, the vijanden. And I'm like, who are the vijanden? You know, so there are certain things, or the enemies. It was a competitive field, and it would be interesting to find. Maybe there's more to discover. Yes. Oh, let's wait for the microphone. Sorry, Paige is coming.
No, we need the mic, please. Thank you.
I'm interested in what her husband was doing. What kind of occupation did he have?
Oh, thank you. Yes. Good question, because he's right here on the screen, so very appropriate. So Julian Pol was also a painter. He was a portrait painter, and he made some portraits of Frederick Ruysch, but also this very interesting family portrait that I'm happy to say in the exhibition. And he depicted the figures, so it's Julian Pol, the husband, Ruysch, and then their youngest son, who's named Johann Willem, and who offers Ruysch this medal of Johann Willem to sort of, that she had received from her patron, and then she added the flowers. And what's interesting is that Julian points to this easel in the background, and he's behind her, and it's almost like he's very supportive of her, right? So he's not that famous. She was clearly more famous than he was. And what's interesting is that they joined the Confrérie Pictura together, and they were also both appointed court painter. So it was sort of a two-people deal, and I think it gave her a bit of protection, because imagine becoming, women couldn't really join guilds most of the cases. So the fact that she was admitted to the Confrérie Pictura, which is a painters association in The Hague, meant that she was the only woman amongst this group of men. But having her husband with her was probably helpful if they had, meetings or dinners or what have you. So a portrait painter, but not a really famous one. She was really the more talented one.
I was wondering if you have thoughts on, so it's striking to me how famous it seems she was in her lifetime, and then how obscure it seems she became afterwards. And I'm wondering if you think that that's because she was a woman or because she painted flowers. Like, do you think it's the still lifes sort of fell out of favor, or do you think that it was her gender that sort of contributed to her falling out of our history textbooks?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple reasons, because there are, of course, a lot of other flower painters. And we've had exhibition, Jan van Huysum, of course, there is a catalog raisonné on his work. There have been exhibition on Jan van Huysum, who was an 18th century flower painter. And of Willem van Aalst also had an exhibition at the National Gallery and the Houston Museum, about 10 years ago. So I think it may also have to do with the fact that she was born after Rembrandt, or, sort of in the decade that Rembrandt died. If you read early 20th century histories of Dutch art by Martin, for example, and he calls the time after Rembrandt's death the downward, you get the flourishing and sort of the downfall. So because she sort of straddled the 18th century, and we grew up in the Netherlands in the 18th century, so like, it's for, that's not for us. We were really, flourishing in the 17th century. So I think that was one of the reasons. Another reason is that her patron was German. So most of the paintings actually today are in Germany. There's 5 in the Netherlands and there's like 40 in Germany. So had she worked for the House of Orange, it may have helped her. And then the third reason, I do think that, she was not really part of the canon. She was very popular in the art market, but I don't think she was sort of on the radar of art historians, 20 or 30 years ago. And so I think her gender may have something to do with that. Sort of anecdotally, there is a colleague who had proposed a Ruysch exhibition at a museum, and they said no. So I think there is certainly that as well. But I think it's multiple reasons. And the 18th century was not always as popular as the 17th.
Hi, I was wondering if you could tell us more about what the collaborative process was, working with the other museums and how this exhibit got pulled together?
Sure, yeah, so it was a partnership with the Toledo Museum of Art and the Alta Pinacotheek. So the curator in Toledo initiated the project. So he came with the idea to us and about 3.5 years ago. So we, decided to sign on, and then we proposed it to Munich, and then they joined us. And so you start by sort of developing the checklist and going, as I said, we went to the Vernisserie in Germany to sort of see as many paintings as possible and then do joint loan requests. And then, the exhibition sort of travels from place to place. I should say that because of the nature of the specimens, of course, those are much harder to transport. So each show is sort of unique in how it's arranged. Ours has, fewer paintings, and we have a lot of the specimens here from Harvard. Munich, of course, worked with, the Bayerische Kunstsammlung. So we each sort of give our own sort of unique, made our own display the way, we liked it, but the core of the paintings is the same. Yeah.
I'm just curious, after the exhibition terminates, all these paintings will be flowing elsewhere. Are there going to be any left here at the museum?
Yes, so we're very proud that there's 2 works in the exhibition that are in the MFA's collection. So there's a work from this period, from 1709, a larger work from the Van Otterloo collection. And then in 2023, we acquired a much smaller work of her late period, dated 1742, that she actually added her age to, which is done on panel, which is much smaller and modest, which you can see in the last room. And so those 2 paintings will fortunately stay here. And so we're proud to have 2 Ruysch paintings in our collection. Considering that there's only 10 in public collections in the United States, that's a really good number. Thank you. But yeah, you have until December 7th to see the show and tell your friends, because of course it is a big project to borrow these works from both Europe and the United States and to bring them all together. And as our registrar, who does all the work on the transportation side, told me, she's like, oh, I'm already booking the couriers for the way back. And I'm thinking, oh gosh. So yeah, take advantage of the opportunity.